Moving on to the economy, Union Minister Prakash Javadekar has categorically denied any kind of crisis in the economy in India. He's gone on to say that the government is taking measures wherever needed and the fundamentals of the economy are still strong. His comment, of course, comes days after Piyush Goyal dismissed the need for mathematics to understand the economy and the government's targets. The finance minister had blamed millennials as one of the reasons for the auto slowdown a day before that.
सरकार ने अर्थव्यवस्था को मजबूत करने के लिए हर कदम उठाया है और मैं फिर से बताना चाहता हूं, भारतीय अर्थव्यवस्था के फंडामेंटल्स मजबूत है और कोई हमारा ऐसा क्राइसिस का स्थिति नहीं है। साइक्लिकल एक नॉन बैंकिंग फाइनेंस कंपनियों में कर्जा कम देने के कारण कुछ रिएक्शंस हमें दिखती है, लेकिन सरकार लगातार स्थिति को संभालने के लिए लगातार उपाय करती है। यही तो सरकार की एफिशिएंसी है।
Well, in an attempt to boost demand and improve liquidity in the economy, the finance minister today announced that banks would hold loan melas, what she called shamiana meetings with NBFCs and retail borrowers in 400 districts over the next few weeks. The idea being to ensure maximum credit dispersal before the festive season. The finance minister has also announced that banks won't declare any stressed loans of the MSME sector as non-performing assets or bad loans until March next year.
We have, and I'm very grateful to all the bank chairmen and EDs who have come here for having readily agreed to a suggestion that we put forward. We have now, and MOS Anurag Thakur will be in charge of doing this particular assignment. We have decided that in 200 districts of the country, between now and the 29th of September, there shall be a gathering which the banks will have of the NBFCs with whom they've tied up and given liquidity. It shall be a public affair where the bank will lend to the NBFC, or the NBFCs who have now benefited from the liquidity being given to them will be there, and there'll also be retail customers who would come claim anything that they want for credit. They can belong to the famous RAM category, which is the retail. They can belong to agriculture, which means farmers. They can also belong to MSME sector. We are also adding those who want loans for houses, those who want vehicle loans also to come there.
Also, the finance minister announced that as far as the MSME sector is concerned, in a move to help the MSME sector, the banks would consider a one-time settlement for loans that the sector is unable to pay. Also, no bad loans or unpaid loans of the MSME sector will be categorized as NPAs until March of this financial year, which is March early next year. We'll also take a look at how much this is going to help the liquidity problem in the market right now. But meanwhile, Hero MotoCorp has urged the government to consider a phase-wise reduction of GST on all automobiles, cutting the rates they have asked of two-wheelers first and deferring the tax cut on four-wheelers to a later stage. Now, the country's largest two-wheeler maker has said that the move will help the government contain potential revenue loss and at the same time provide relief to around 20 million probable two-wheeler buyers across the country. So there are several questions to ask. On one hand, there's Union Minister Prakash Javadekar saying that there is no crisis. On the other hand, the finance minister has announced these shamiana melas for banks for lending and measures that they believe will help liquidity. And on the third hand, there's Hero MotoCorp and several other auto industry giants who are asking for a tax cut. Will the tax cut be a solution for the auto industry? Can India afford it? And will the announcements that have been made by the finance minister help the banking sector solve the liquidity problem? I'm also keeping the phone lines open for you to call and ask questions if you want to, because we have a really nice panel this evening. Professor Kumar of JNU, who is the chair professor of the Indian Institute of Social Sciences, has been kind enough to give us his time again tonight. We also have Gaurav Vangal, who is the country head of lead light vehicle production forecasting at IHS Market. We also have Aman Agarwal, who is the director of the Indian Institute of Finance. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Let's first just look at the matter of the announcement of the finance minister before we get to the auto sector. Professor Kumar, you first. Do you believe the announcements of these sort of melas for banks and NBFCs and measures for the MSME sector will help? Will it just basically allow people to borrow more?
So, Faye, the problem really began with the unorganized sector, of which, MSME is a component of that sector. The problem that they are facing is that the demand shifted from the unorganized sector to the organized sector because of GST. Now, that demand shift that has taken place is because of the structural problem in GST. Now, if you don't address the structural problem in GST, then the unorganized sector's demand will not go up because the demand is shifting to the organized sector. And why is that happening? That is happening because in the GST, unorganized sectors kept out of the registration or is in the composition scheme, and therefore they don't get input credit, and because of that their cost is higher, and then they cannot give input credit to the purchaser who purchases from them, so therefore their price is higher. And that's why the demand is shifting, So unless you are able to tackle that problem by reform of GST, you're not going to be able to revive the unorganized sector. So unorganized sector, which has faced three big shocks, of which the biggest one now that they are facing is the problem with GST. And it's not simply a question of reducing tax rates or simplifying tax rates or bringing them under composition scheme, or not requiring them to file returns. It's none of that. It is a structural problem. So of course there were implementation problem, but the problem here is structural. Now, when you say that MSME can borrow, more easily, we had the 59-minute scheme in which in 59 minutes, you could borrow up to 1 crore of rupees, and that obviously has not worked, and therefore there's a different kind of thing. And my own suspicion is that the banks will be very wary because they have got a lot of NPAs. And if you tell them that, they cannot declare NPAs, from MSME sector, etc., and that you can take easy loans, etc., I think there'll be a problem there as far as the banking system is concerned. It will not be able to do that or not be able to cope, because then later on it will get accused that, there are growing NPAs that they have. So my suspicion is that the problem lies somewhere else, whereas a solution is being sought somewhere else. And finally, I would say MSME sector is not a homogeneous one. The micro units are 99% of the MSME sector. Small and medium are only 1%, about 40 to 50,000 units, whereas the micro sector are crores of units. And the problem of the unorganized sector, the micro units. So what may work for small and medium sector may not work for the micro sector. So you need to disaggregate the MSME sector into micro separate and small and medium separate, and then provide a package for the micro sector separately than the small and medium sector.
Okay.
So I think, a lot more thought needs to be given as to how it's to be done.
Right. So it brings us back to the fundamental question of the GST cut. And let me ask this question of Gaurav Vangal, who joins us right now. Gaurav, do you believe a GST cut for the auto sector is the silver bullet that will change everything? Will it suddenly revive the sector? Is that the answer to the problems?
See, there are few factors in it. First of all, the consumer sentiment is very low in automotive industry. So in automotive, we need to revive it, and a GST cut can help us reviving it, first of all, because there is uncertainty in the market. We are waiting for a GST cut for a while now. What we expect from the government, if you can give a GST cut, please give it, or say deny it simply now. Because the uncertainty cloud is so big that this is spoiling the party a long time, right? Now festival is on, we are on the edge of the festival. If you are giving us, please give it us. If you are not, please deny it in a simple word is no. Then industry will take their own precautions, they will take their own measures how to ramp up in this kind of situation. But yes, we need GST cut. It has been done, given in the past also. If you remember, in 2008 and 10, we have done very well with the GST. We are requesting GST because of the transition phase. We are in the BS4 to BS6 transition phase. We are requesting GST for this only, and the consumer sentiments is very low. It will immediately revive the consumer sentiment there, and then you will see the increased footfall in the market. Specifically,
one second, Gaurav, if I may just ask you this. So, on one hand, while Niranjan Gupta, who's the CFO of Hero MotoCorp, has asked for this, sort of selective GST rate cut first for motorcycles and then for cars, let me also point out what Rajiv Bajaj has said. Now, Rajiv Bajaj has said that the current crisis in the automobile industry is because of overproduction and stocking of companies, and to a small extent economic slowdown. There's no need for a GST cut. It will take some time to recover, but it will recover. So, who should we believe, Hero MotoCorp or Bajaj?
No, I believe that, if I have to see that in the car industry, I think we need to have this GST cut. I cannot take a side of any one of that, but I can, as a third party opinion, I would say that GST cut is at a current scenario is highly required. If we are not going to have it, I think we will struggle for a while. But yes, after the transition of BS4 to BS6, we will definitely move ahead.
Okay, also let me just take, Aman Agarwal's opinion on it as well. Do you believe that the GST cut is what we need? Also, more importantly, Mr. Agarwal, can we afford it? Can India afford to pass on that GST cut?
Yes, Faye, a very critical question you asked again. You see, before I go on to the GST, I think I must appreciate the fact that the government has brought in something which I've been talking about for almost 2 months now, regularly at your channel and other places as well, is the fact that they introduce administrative reforms followed by certain other measures, and also relax this NPA issue, which is actually creating a big havoc for the MSME segment. And I'm happy that the minister has actually introduced this and is talking about trying to seep in liquidity, which will actually further boost investment and not just distribute largesse to the people in the unorganized sector. Now, as far as the GST cut is concerned, I think the rationalization of GST is critical. It is important that they rationalize it. I am expecting that if not in this meeting, but maybe the next one, we may have a slab change from 4 to 3. We may also have reduction of certain, because if we saw with the biscuit industry, they were also asking for, specifically Parle was asking for the GST tax removal from this particular biscuit, which is a large consumption biscuit as against a premium biscuit. Now, there is the need and desire of some of the industry, and the fact that we can cut it is not a big problem, because it's a short-term measures. We will certainly rope in. If we have profitability, we'll have more profits, we'll have more taxes otherwise, and GST is not the only way to actually get the revenue for the government. Please also note that we have had a fiscal deficit under control between 3.3 to 3.5%, where we have almost 100 basis points buffer for going forward with this government. So they do have that fiscal space for going about doing it, but my contention has always been that that fiscal space should not be utilized for distributing largesse or distributing monies in terms of just spreading it across to people so that this consumer industry goes up. But it should be invested, developed, like the one which has been done, where they're organizing melas so that people can actually take credit for doing business, for bringing in investment growth, for bringing in other things. Right. And I think that would certainly, I do agree with what Arun was saying, but one point I like to add on to what Arun said also is the fact that please understand that these micro industries which he talked about are actually linked with the macro and the medium and the small industries. They are the feeder industries in large cases to both of them.
But
and so if the small
I have a very fundamental question, and this is,
they will be able to finance this micro.
This is a layman's question, if I may ask it, please. Mr. Agarwal, I'll ask a question of you. The idea, in the day and age of online banking, and basically we know that all banking right now, between customer and bank and NBFC and RBI and back again, happens entirely online. A mela under a shamiana physically,
no, I would not.
How could that be a solution to the lack of lending? It's not like we were not borrowing up till now because there was no shamiana that we could go to.
Yeah. Correct. No, I agree. There are two things to it. Well, firstly, you see, the banks in the last 2 years, because of the PCA structures and the restrictions which have been put, and then the kind of fear factor which has developed in the banking industry for giving out loans, have been under a structure wherein there is a fear factor from even a person who wants to seek a loan, that whether would I get a loan or not get a loan. Now that actually gets down when you bring out such kind of schemes wherein you open up the banks and say, we are actually going in for a mailer, we are going on to give loans. Secondly, please understand, despite the fact that we have moved extensively this economy into a less cash economic framework, but a large chunk of money is still out with the public. You can see the kind of money supply which is there as against what it was even at the time of demonetization. It is said it is even much more. So there is money which is in play. There is large amount of business which actually still takes place on cash basis, despite the government's efforts to bring it online or bring it digital, but there is still a large amount of cash economy. So the issue here is not of creating melelas for the cash disbursements. The issue here is the disbursements may still take place online. It may be through those online accounts, but the issue is that this comfort zone barrier mentally which had been created because of the PCAs, because of the restrictions by banks, because of the setback a lot of industries have faced in the last 2 years, that the banks will not give me a money if I want it for working capital or other things, and then if I have to, then I will be in a problem that they will raise it to an NPA and then they will liquidate my assets, whichever I have done, by even putting my own money into the own business.
Right.
So that actually gets resolved by these
agree
two
that
facts,
that's the problem.
Fine, we are open here,
Mr.
and
Agarwal.
second, that the NPA will not be there.
Yes, I agree that that's the problem. I still am not fully convinced that a mela is the solution. But okay, Professor Kumar has his hand up. Professor Kumar, go ahead.
Yeah, so, regarding the automobile sector,
Yes.
I think there is a fitment committee which decides what the rate should be. And the fitment committee has, I think, already said that they don't want a cut in the rate of tax for the automobile sector. And there is a good reason for that, because if you do sector-wise, then there'll be a lot of sectoral demands for cut in taxes, because the recession that is there in the economy is being faced by several sectors. It'd be textiles, it'd be FMCG, and so on and so forth. So there'll be a huge demand for that. And at the moment, our fiscal deficit is more like 9%, not 3.3%. As the CAG said, that the central government has shifted the borrowing onto the public sector, and therefore it's not showing the fiscal deficit in the central budget. So it's not 3.4% or 3.3%, but CAG said it is 5.8%, and if you add to that the state's fiscal deficit, then it becomes almost 9%, So it's a political decision that if we cut our taxes, on GST, across the board on several, goods, and especially those which give you a high amount of, taxes, then you'll face the problem of the fiscal deficit rising, unless you raise resources from somewhere else. And that political decision has not been made, that you will raise it from direct taxes. So neither a decision has been made to raise the fiscal deficit, nor to raise direct taxes. In fact, direct taxes that were raised earlier were withdrawn. So I don't see that the government's budgetary arithmetic will allow a cut in taxes on automobiles or on other sectors, given that GST buoyancy is not high and tax collection was projected to be very high, but it's not coming out to be that. The data shows that, the projection was that 17 to 18% rise would take place in taxes, but they're barely rising at about 5%. So therefore, the deficit is likely to rise. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the problem is a wider demand shortage, not a specific...
As we have been instructed to do.
Yeah.
Then out of just sheer will, can't we make it work? If this, fundamentally, the government has told us to stop thinking about the mathematics.
I know, but the point is, at the end of the day, they also say we'll maintain the fiscal deficit at 3.3%. So then they shouldn't say that, and they shouldn't worry about, what the fiscal deficit would be, or they shouldn't worry about where to raise the direct taxes from. And regarding overproduction in the automobile sector, the problem is that demand is short, and therefore you're producing less than what you could produce. So there's no overproduction. Overproduction is in relationship to the demand, but not in relationship to the capacity. Capacity exists, and you're producing 30% less than what you produced last year in the same month of August. So the problem here is shortage of demand, and this shortage of demand in automobile sector comes first, because first you would like to consume the essentials, And if you're not able to consume the essentials, then the demand for automobiles falls faster. It's a luxury product. Whether it's for the entry level or for the two-wheelers, those people are buying, it's a luxury product. And that's why its demand has fallen the most. But the real crisis is that the textiles, FMCG, and all these other things, freight traffic, retail trade, all of those are falling, which shows that there's a generalized demand problem, and therefore the solution has to be found for the generalized demand problem.
Right. So I just want to bring in Gaurav here one more time. Gaurav, a couple of questions, and I want you to specifically address this business of a banking mela. Now, it's true also we know that because automobile sales are down, automobile loans are down. People are not taking those loans because they're not buying cars or motorcycles. Will a mela solve that problem, and will the mela allow for liquidity for people to go out and buy these products? Secondly, you're very interestingly the head of production forecasting. So this is an important question for you to answer. The question of overproduction. Explain to us how companies decide how many units they're going to manufacture every year. Is it done based on the government's own forecast of how well the economy is doing and how well we're going to do over the next year or so? Because the government has been denying, as of today, any sort of slowdown.
Okay, so answer to your first question, I think yes, this banking mela can help, but we need to see that how much awareness about this banking mela to the common consumer on the street. If it is available, I think this is going to help, but this kind of melas may not bring major impact to the auto industry till the time it is being given to the till the end of the showrooms, because every channel, every retail channel has their own salesperson doing all this stuff. Okay, first thing. The second thing, what you asked for the production forecasting, I think this is all related. It is related on to the Indian economy, domestic economy, how it is going to do in next 1 year or 2 years, 3 years. It also depends on the demographic. It also depends on the export side. It's not essential that we are only dependent on the production domestic sales, but yes, majorly approximately 85% of our production is being consumed in Indian market only 15% goes out into the export market. And interestingly, export demand is also not great this year because it's a global kind of recession. We are in top 10 production countries. Approximately 5 are already down, and we expect that 7 are going to be down by the end of the year. So this is the scenario. But yes, for production side, domestic sales in India is very important, and to revive it, government needs to take some step specifically to remove the uncertainty from the market.
Right, and I saw Aman Agarwal's hand go up. You have something to say? Go ahead.
Yes, you see, Faye, it's a very important component which I've been talking about is the automobile sector in specific, but in other sector as well it is happening, that there is excessive regulation, and the particular in automobile is the regulation being brought out by NGT in the name of environment. You see, making a life of a car 10 or 15 years in a country where about almost 98% of the population buys the car as a capital asset for life. You're telling that person in this country that your life of an asset which you're buying for life is only 10 or 15 years, you're actually deterring them to tell that do not buy a car. And that is what is happening. Secondly, you say we want to move to EVM immediately. Why would automobile manufacturers who have already invested heavily in whatever they were making shift immediately to EVM just because the government wants it to do? They will have to do ultimately because it's a rule of the land. But it will take time. They have already developed certain mechanisms, they've already developed certain production, they would like that to go, and no one will want to buy that because it's an old technology now, because you want the EVMs to come in, the electric vehicles to come in. The third component which is very critical here is also the fact that, so I don't disagree with what Bajaj is saying, the other gentlemen are saying, they're saying right, but the important component here is the fact that you're actually spoiling the markets by bringing extortive regulations. This Motor Vehicle Act is actually deterring. Yes, it is disciplining people, it is bringing order on the roads. I don't disagree with that fact, but the fact that the way it is introduced at random in a shock will actually deter away people again further for going ahead to buy cars. They say, why take the trouble? Why get a bill of 1 lakh, 2 lakh or 5 lakh rupees when I should take a car which will come on lease? Why should I do it otherwise? So these are some of the mechanisms which are creating. And then those vehicles which are actually creating pollutions, there is no stop on them. You see, it's been years now, those vehicles which are known for creating pollutions, there is no stop on them, and the NGT keeps coming in. Now they are putting regulations in almost all sectors. So that is why we are seeing a lot of, you see, when regulations need to be introduced smoothly, and the one last point, Faye. Regulators, in my opinion, need to be facilitators and not actually regulators of the way they were in the 1960s and 70s. And I think the government needs to help the regulators understand this fact that they need to be facilitators for growth to come in. And that has to be very critical. Survival of the people and the benefit to the people at the end of the day would be important. If there are no people, no business at the ground, how will you actually go about running a government? Now, it's important that the people at the end of the day are happy. Fiscal deficit figures 3.5%,
so
4%,
let me just ask,
11 Let's forget about that statistics part.
Yes, let me just ask this question of Gaurav very quickly, and this is something that has come up. For the current tax that is on automobiles is 28%. There's been a demand to bring it down to 18%. That's a 10% reduction in the tax. How much of a difference will that make to the pricing of automobiles that you'll be able to pass on to customers, and suddenly the customers will suddenly revive their sentiment? Why can't that just be passed on in discounts right now from the manufacturers and the dealers?
Very good point, very valid point. I think we are already giving 10% discounts. If you go out in the market, you see multiple manufacturers are already providing more than 10% of the discount in the market, right? The point comes out to be that how to revive the sentiments. We are giving discounts on the bits and pieces, and we are talking about the consumer sentiments to revive. When the government will come and say the GST cut of 28 to 18% happens, you see the reaction from the consumer. The consumer accepts it immediately, and he will definitely think that that 10% reduction is going to come to their pricing side altogether, right? The sentiments is more important, not about the discounts. We are saying any stimulus given by the government is going to help us regenerate the sentiments. The revival of the sentiments is important. Discounts we are already giving. All of the manufacturers are on the highest point of the discounts right now.
Okay, all right. Professor Kumar, quick point to you. It is at the end of the day about sentiment.
Yeah.
And so the announcements that are constantly coming from the Finance Ministry and from the government, does that aid in improving sentiment, sending the message that, listen, we are making things easier, we are making things more accessible, thereby perhaps bringing the bees back to the hive in some way, so bringing people back to banks to borrow, back to showrooms to buy?
So, you know, Faye, the first point I'd like to make is that when you said that 28% cut in GST to 18%, that 10% is actually a cost to the business. So therefore, it's not that they can reduce that 10% as a discount. You know, discount means taking it out of your profit. So the GST is not a part of the profit, you know. So when you give a 10% reduction, it's not the same thing as giving a discount. So the industry is giving a discount to whatever extent it can because it has large inventories, and I don't think it's going to be able to give any further discounts. So only when the GST is reduced will they be able to reduce the price, and that will then maybe spur some demand. However, as I said earlier, automobile is a luxury segment. You know, even the entry-level car for a farmer is a luxury. For a lower middle class, motorcycle is a luxury. So they first will fulfill demand for basics like FMCG and textiles and others, and then only shift to automobiles and to, you know, the other such things. And you can see that the demand shortage is very real because even the commercial vehicles, you know, their demand has come down. Tractors, their demand has come down. So it means the transportation has come down. The use in farming has come down. So it's a generalized demand problem. And unless you tackle the generalized demand problem, cut in the automobile sector will not really spur increase in demand to the extent that it's expected. So I don't think the solution lies there. And if you have only limited resources in your budget and you give it through GST cut to automobile sector, you'll not be able to give a package to the unorganized sector. That is where the demand really problem began. So to give demand, to give resources there so that you can spur demand for FMCG and for other such things, then only will the demand revive for the luxury products like automobile sector. Another point I'd like to make is with regard to export. Today, the export is going to be very uncertain given that that Germany is having negative growth rate. China is slowing down. It's slowing down. France is slowing down. Britain is slowing down because of Brexit. Eurozone is going to be facing down. American rate of growth is coming down. So in that situation, to expect that the export market will do very well, that's very uncertain at all. So I don't think the export market will really work, and especially now that the oil prices may go up given the uncertainty in oil, even demand for cars, if the oil prices rise, diesel prices and petrol prices rise, that will further reduce demand for automobiles in the country. And the government will not be able to give cut in excise duty or in VAT for petroleum goods, because then its fiscal deficit will rise. So unless you make a decision how much your fiscal deficit can rise, none of these can happen.
Yes. All right, we're going to leave it there. So it would be an understatement to say at this point that the Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, has perhaps the most difficult job in the country right now. All of the recommendations involve spending money. Unfortunately, we understand day after day that tax collections are lower than expected. She doesn't have as much money to spend as she would have liked to, or she would have thought she had at the beginning of the year. Now, giving this GST cut to the automobile sector, we understand, will result in a 50,000 crore rupee loss of revenue to the government. We simply might not be able to afford it. And of course, there are experts on our panel who said that it might not be the solution at all. To make matters worse, of course, or more difficult at least, there are states like West Bengal, Bihar, Kerala, Punjab that are clearly against giving a cut to the auto sector because states are also concerned about revenue at this point. The meeting of the GST Council will take place tomorrow, and we will know one way or the other which way that goes. But that's part of the larger tapestry of the story as far as the Indian economy is concerned. At the end of the day, sentiment is low. People aren't spending money. That's the problem that needs solution. Well, moving on to Bangalore, where killer potholes are costing us lives. A lady and her 2 children were seriously injured after their scooter hit a pothole and skidded on Bangalore's Gunjar Road. 4-year-old girl sustained deep cuts on her forehead and the other child was injured at his hands. The incident took place when the woman was dropping her children off to school. Our reporter later found that the Bangalore Water Board had dug up that road to lay a pipeline and covered it with mud and gravel instead of actually fixing it. Mirror Now's Shrija confronted the Bangalore Civic Body Chief Anil Kumar on the incident, and he said the officer in charge of the road has been suspended. Take a look.
No, not really. What has happened is that, see, we have added 110 villages to the city, and all these villages need to have drinking water and underground drainage. So we need to lay the pipelines. There's no alternative to that. The fact of the matter is that we should have, as soon as the work of completing of the laying the underground water lines has been done, we should have restored back. Right. So I am not making any excuses for what has happened.
You are admitting to what has happened.
What has happened, and we need to have prevented such a thing happening. That's why we have placed the concerned engineers under suspension. So we will be initiating disciplinary action also against them.
Will you be able to give us a deadline when the potholes across the city will be fixed?
See, we cannot have a deadline for such a kind of thing, because potholes, if the drainage system is not adequate, the potholes tend to develop. What we can do is try and minimize them. Whatever are the potholes which are there, we can try and minimize them. Apart from that, this is not a pothole. This is an entire stretch of road which has been dug up because of the laying of the pipeline. So we need to restore back this road, and after restoring, we need to bring up the entire surface so that we make it motorable.
Of course, we're going to keep tracking this because at the end of the day, while the government has decided to levy higher fines on those who break the rules on the road and cause hurt and injury and sometimes lives, there seems to be absolutely no result or consequence whatsoever for those people who risk our lives with bad roads. Something that we take very personally here on Mirror Now. Malnutrition continues to be a problem in India, even in 2019. As per the latest report from the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, 2 out of 3 child deaths in India because of a base of malnutrition. 2 out of 3. According to the report, even as the overall number of deaths from malnourishment has dropped, malnutrition remains the leading risk factor for 68% of the deaths of children under the age of 5, which basically means, like we had seen in this case of encephalitis in Bihar, when the children are already malnourished and weak, a disease that can otherwise be treated kills them. Tonight, as we sit down to dinner with our children in urban India, we have to consider the fact that we live in a country where a shocking number of children go to bed every night hungry. Going to bed hungry is also costing them their lives. Does India need a new plan? Do we as urban citizens need to be doing more? Or is it okay for us to live in our little urban bubble and forget about the rest of India? Suchi Mahajan, Director of Global Health Strategies, has earlier worked with UNICEF in Rajasthan on malnourishment, joins us right now. So does Poonam Mutrija, the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India. I consider her a specific expert when it comes to these matters. Dr. Sameer Dalwai joins us as well. He's the spokesperson for the Indian Academy of Pediatrics. I welcome you to the panel, all three of you, and I thank you for being so patient and generous with your time. Poonamji, I'll start with you. These numbers are worrying because one would have assumed, with everything we've learned about healthcare and, you know, with just the development in science and technology, that we would have reached a point where malnourishment is not killing children in our country. But have the numbers actually been getting worse?
See, the numbers in India, I would like to say, have improved, and that's what the data shows. But we still have 61 million children who are undernourished, and we have the highest 20% of the deaths are contributed by India. So while the percentage may increase, but the numbers become still continue to be large. So I'd like to say that we've done very little, and we are talking about 1,000 days of the child and taking care of the child. But undernourished children who are born low weight from mothers who marry early or who are themselves anemic, 1/3 women are undernourished, almost 50% of women are anemic. So it's a vicious cycle. We have to have an integrated approach. And these mothers, there's a strong correlation, Faye, between mothers' education and mothers' nutrition. We have to look at more holistically. Just having investing only in the babies who are born underweight is a huge challenge. Even when children are under care, if they are born underweight and undernourished, they will die because there are all these other diseases that they are susceptible to. As you rightly mentioned, encephalitis, and there are many other diarrheal diseases. It is undernourished children of undernourished mothers or anemic mothers who have a 50% higher chance of dying. So I don't think when we have such large numbers, we can celebrate that we have lowered the number, because ultimate analysis, we have intergenerational you know, nutrition affects you intergenerationally. So underweight babies, female babies that grow up and survive will produce underweight, undernourished babies. There is a vicious cycle. So there are social indicators. There are other things we need to invest in, along with making sure there's food for the children as we have food for on our tables, as you rightly said.
Yes, Dr. Dalwai is with us as well. Dr. Dalwai, this is obviously a program going out to urban India. It's something that we don't come in contact with undernourished, malnourished children, children who are born underweight, or what is known as wasting, which is basically their height and their weight is not in proportion. What should we be doing? Is there something that urban India can do or should do to help solve this problem?
Hello?
Yes, Dr. Dalwai, can you hear me? Go ahead.
Hello, I think I lost you there. Yes, yes. I think we must understand that the body fights infections based on its immune system, and the immune system derives strength from nutrition. And hence, if the child is malnourished or undernourished or poorly nourished, what basically happens is the child's ability to fight any kind of infection goes down. And hence this child, it's not just the malnutrition, but the fact that the child's immunity is low because of malnutrition, that the child could die from common diseases like diarrhea and pneumonia. And hence what this report has said is extremely important, because it's not only managing or monitoring the weight and the heights, but what it brings to our attention is the number of deaths that malnutrition is the culprit of. But what we understand the cause of death is, perhaps we blame it on put it on the diarrhea or the pneumonia, and we think only the vaccines can help. Of course vaccines help, but not if the child is undernourished. And it's a very important report that has brought out the importance of malnutrition in deaths. Otherwise it's not connected. So it's very important. What we must understand is, like ma'am said just now, it's a transgenerational thing. And hence, in about 8-9 years back, under the Citizens Alliance for Malnutrition, we had presented to the Prime Minister a demand saying that under the National Food Security Act, 3 sections of the population should be looked after primarily. That's of course the children below 2 years of age, of course pregnant women, but also adolescent girls, because you know in India adolescent girls also get married and have babies very early when their own bodies haven't developed. They're going to give birth to a low birth weight child or a premature child, who is then going to end up getting malnourished and diseased and perhaps unfortunately die, or if survives, will survive as a malnourished adult, malnourished girl, and will give birth to another malnourished or a stunted child. Just in Melghat this year, in Melghat only in Maharashtra, we've had 65 stillbirths and 134 deaths related to malnutrition this year. In Melghat last year we had 409. That's just one small area of Maharashtra. So what we must understand, the factors are not only what we are looking at, it has to go down to the last mile. We need to have medical support on the ground, we need to have pediatricians on the ground, because all this infrastructure is missing, and just having some schemes is not going to help. We are paying a lot of attention to SAM, that's severe acute malnutrition, but the MAM numbers are being kind of not revealed, because that would be really alarming. And it doesn't take long for a child with MAM, that is moderate acute malnutrition, to slip into SAM and then get into the red belt. So this, I think, is very important for us to understand.
Well, you know, I want to just constantly put this matter in terms that will appeal to the urban citizen. And so I want to ask Suchi this question. The truth is, and we're talking about children under the age of 5. When children under the age of 5 are not fed adequately, their brains simply don't develop. And then it doesn't matter what kind of opportunities we give them in school or college and as adults, they will just not be able to compete against children or with children from urban India or children who have been well fed. So what we're doing effectively is raising an entire population of people who won't be able to rise to the expectations of this new India that we want to build. Suchi?
No, absolutely. See, malnutrition, as you know, the other two guests have rightly pointed out, it's an interplay of different factors, which can be social, environmental, economic, and it is important to, talk about these issues also and not talk about standalone stunting or wasting. When a anemic woman goes into pregnancy, there's a high probability that she would actually deliver a lower weight baby. And then again, there's a high probability that a low birth weight baby might go into the cycle of malnutrition. And besides malnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies again is a big issue which the country is fighting. For example, more than 50% of the women in our country are anemic. More than 68% of the children are anemic, right? And iron is an important component to ensure that the cognitive development is good, the physical development is good. So if we are not able to address these issues, obviously we're not doing any justice to our children. Another point is that we have to look at malnutrition in a more holistic manner. We have to take into consideration the social determinants and other factors like WASH, appropriate hygiene schemes, appropriate sanitation schemes. And I feel that though the situation is grim, I completely agree on that, but there is cognizance. I mean, the successive governments have been working on this issue. We have National Nutrition Mission now. There are multiple schemes which are there in place. We have ICDS, we have midday meals, we have Anemia Mukt Bharat, and so on and so forth. What is actually required is the action on the ground and getting the communities together, creating that awareness among the communities, because a lot of time cultural practices also impact the nutritional outcomes. And I think that is something we really need to focus on. A lot of places, women still eat in the last, right? There is still gender parity is not there. So we need to take into consideration all these factors also when we talk about malnutrition and to address malnutrition.
All right, I'm going to do a quick round of questions to the entire panel to ask what we can do in urban India to help out. Poonamji, you first. I don't want this show to go to waste. If there's anything that urban Indians ought to be doing right now, even if it's just talking about it or tweeting about it, what do you think we can do to make a difference?
So talking about it, tweeting about it is not going to solve the problem. There are 2 or 3 things I'd like to suggest.
Yes,
First of all, we need to go beyond rice and grains and sugar. We need to provide food and subsidize food under the Food Security Act. Nutritious food, which could include eggs. We could distribute it for the army. Unfortunately, we've stopped it for the armed forces. But to our poorest, we know who this 52% are and in which states they are. We need to provide nutritious food to not just our children in the first 1,000 days. We need to have our adolescent mothers be very much part, the 50% women who are anemic in this country, girls who are anemic, adolescents who are anemic, we need to put them in an emergency manner, under a food security regime. And I believe we can do it because we waste so much of our food. 40% of our fruits, for instance, and vegetables rot and go bad. So we need good distribution systems, and we cannot rely on our corrupt. I'm not calling government only corrupt. I'm calling our people corrupt. The people who supply midday meals, the people in Bihar who supplied roti and rice when they were given budgets for vegetables, fruits, and eggs. We need to have systems, and there are NGOs like Akshay Patra. Those of us, we can, as a community, to change social norms, as the earlier speaker said, whether it is in urban areas or in rural areas, we can adopt to give cooked food to families on an emergency basis and for long term, not just for 2 months or 3 months. It is an absolute shame that we do not have food kitchens for our hungry, malnourished people. We can, it's not just NGOs, but families can adopt. Yes. So if every person who's concerned, Faye, after seeing your program, can say, okay, I will feed 10 children. 10 children who are clearly undernourished, and the government has records, data at the district level, village level, and so on. So we have to express our concern and love by giving. As far as the government programs go, I think the government can do it, and we need very strict monitoring of our Anganwadis, our midday meals, and feeding our pregnant, not just our pregnant women, but before they get pregnant, the adolescents. Finally, let's stop saying that, for instance, for the third child, while we are worrying about these kids, we are saying the third child, which is probably going to be born to a poor family, we will not have rations for them. Let's look at it holistically, as one of the earlier speakers also said, but it's not just the babies, it is the mothers. It is postponing age at marriage, it is educating women, and using social behavior and changing social norms of feeding. You know, there is so much bread being bought in the villages today. There is chips everywhere. We have to do something about that food, but we have to re-look at what our children and anemic mothers are eating and what do they need to eat. And the government can afford to provide. It is government's responsibility. And we have to push for that through our tweets, articles, and advocating with the government to work differently. And citizens, finally, Faye, I'd like to say, citizens should volunteer, both in villages and urban areas, to go and monitor in the feeding centers and ICDS program, just like we do election booths.
Yes, Dr. Dalwai. Yes. Let me just bring in the other. Dr. Dalwai, the truth is that we do have urban poor, and like Poonamji pointed out, we could volunteer, we could make sure that we ensure certain children are fed, or a certain number of children that we take on as our own responsibility. But what would your advice be on what we can do about this?
No, I think there's a misconception that urban India does not have malnutrition or malnourished children. Half of India is in its smaller towns now, and the amount of malnourished children you'd see in the slums or in the poorer areas is amazing. It's really a huge number that we are missing out on. In fact, in the villages, somewhere or the other, unless they are completely a desolate area, they would get some food. But in urban areas, you may not have access to any food at all. And I have seen poor families buying some chips and some wafers and feeding their child, and because both the parents are out at work. So I think we need a concerted effort. My point is this: malnutrition should be a national emergency. We've been discussing this very often. Malnutrition, even when we spoke about Bihar encephalitis, it wasn't encephalitis as much as malnutrition. It should be taken as a national shame and as a national emergency. If you can have a national registry of citizens and find out each and every citizen where he is from, why can't we find out a registry of each and every child who has MAM or SAM, or who is malnourished basically, who is wasted or stunted? And why can't, instead of having these lakhs of detention centers, let's not get into the politics of that, why can't we have some work for these children and nurse them back to health and full nourishment, at least till they are 6 years old? Because we know the maximum deaths happen either in the first 1,000 days or as a consequence in the first 6 years of life. Why can't we have a national registry of malnourished children and watch each and every one of them? Unfortunately, like somebody mentioned, the schemes and corruption, what's important is to count each and every child. We are counting tigers, we are counting endangered species. How about counting each and every child that's born in our country and making sure that he or she reaches 6 years without this danger of malnutrition? That's what I'd like to say.
Very well said. Unfortunately, I'm out of time and I'm going to leave it here. But Suchi Mahajan, we will have more conversations about this, and I do hope you will join us in the future. It fundamentally boils down to this. Every single child who is born in India is our child. And it is our responsibility as Indians to make sure that these children are fed enough so that they grow into strong, able, well-thinking adults. So while it is our responsibility to make sure that they're given opportunities and education and rights, it's also our responsibility to make sure that they're given basic food. Poonamji pointed out that the distribution of eggs and milk by itself can solve so many of our problems. To adolescent girls who will then turn into young mothers who will give birth to little babies, making sure that our next generation is secure. Between the ages of 0 to 5 is when we need to make sure that they're fed adequately. If you feel helpless right now, by looking at the visuals that are on your screen, remember there are hundreds of NGOs, hundreds and hundreds of NGOs in your neighborhood with whom you can volunteer to make sure that children are being fed. And we all know that there's nothing as satisfying as watching a child eat. I hope you will do more than just tweet about it. And if you do decide to volunteer, share with us visuals and information about the NGO you are working with. It will help other people also get started. Last story before I leave you. Israel's general election this week, the second in 5 months, is again too close to call. It appears right now that the long reign of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu might come to an end after all. Now, neither Netanyahu nor his main rival, former army chief Benny Gantz, seem to have won enough votes to claim an outright majority in the Israeli parliament. So, the post of Prime Minister is likely to be decided right now by a coalition with Benny Gantz and his blue and white party, who might be given the first chance to form the government. Now, to give you a background of how we got to this point, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been Israel's longest-serving prime minister, is facing indictment accusations of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Now, these allegations had cast a massive shadow over his election campaign and the election in April, and the second one that took place this week. They've damaged his reputation and the reputation of his family. His wife is also co-accused. Now, earlier this year, when Netanyahu was unable to produce a governing coalition, he chose instead to send the country back to the polls rather than to give somebody else a chance to form the government from within his party. He hoped he would be able to come back with better numbers. That is a gamble that doesn't seem to have paid off. Reports from Israel now suggest that Netanyahu has reached out to Gantz across the aisle to start negotiations on a joint administration. But Gantz has rejected the idea, saying it's just spin. He says he wants a unified government, but only one that's led by him. And his party has ruled out joining the coalition led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who faces corruption charges. Well, the reason why we're bringing it up is this. The outcome of these elections are being watched very closely by countries across the world, especially by the United States and, of course, by India. Given our Prime Minister's groundwork over the last several years in building a more public or a more transparent relationship with Israel, a relationship in which trade, investment, information technology and defense have benefited, the outcome of this election will, of course, have an impact on that relationship. To help us understand how much of an impact, Mr. Talmiz Ahmed, former diplomat, joins me on the phone line. Mr. Ahmed, good evening and thank you for giving us your time. The groundwork right now that our Prime Minister has done with Israel, how much of that might be rocked by the outcome of this election?
Firstly, I should clarify to you that foreign policy and international relations is not a personal matter.
Yes.
Yes, certain good chemistry can happen, can take place between leaders.
Yes.
Our relationship with Israel is very substantial, very multifaceted. It goes back to 1992 when we established relations, and it has been steadily built up over the years. It has certain aspects which are worth noting. There is the defense aspect. Israel has become a major supplier of weapons to us, of defense technology as well. It's about 8% of our defense imports. The Russians are still over 60%, followed by the Americans, and then there is Israel, about 8%. We also have relations with them connected with the import of technology, and we have certain joint projects. So let us not imagine that this is something which is a personal achievement of Mr. Modi alone. He has built up a certain relationship, but this relationship predates him. Do recall that Netanyahu has been around for several years, and even the previous prime ministers have engaged with him. Though obviously our prime minister now has indicated a certain personal bonhomie. So I think that yes, there is going to. I don't think there will be any impact whatsoever. Once these election results have been sorted out and we have a government, I think there is a continuity here which has nothing to do with the personalities of the two leaders. I think that we have a lot of substance that has been built up over the years, and I think it will continue.
All right, Mr. Ahmed, many thanks for clarifying that for us. Talmiz Ahmed, the very senior former diplomat, clarifying quite clearly that he doesn't believe that a change in prime ministership in Israel will have any impact on the relationship that Israel has with India. I'm going to leave it there now for the Urban Debate. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.